Want to learn how to create decorative edges before applying your epoxy? This is one of 3 videos we're launching that demonstrate custom countertop edging while also including the epoxy install, so you can see exactly what the finished product looks like. It's basically 2 videos in one. Alright guys, so we're going to be showing you how you can use our patcher paste to create a crushed rock edge on your countertop. Our patcher paste is a 2-to-1 ratio, and then we're also going to be adding 20% baking soda to thicken up the patcher paste so that it doesn't sag when we apply it to this side of the countertop. And we're also going to be adding 2% accelerator, which will make it flash off faster and get harder faster, so when you come back the next day you'll be able to sand off those high ridges and get right into priming. So we'll just get into it. And then we have our really cool Leggari paint sticks, which get right under that edge so you can get all your material out of the bucket.
So I'll be going over how to apply this to your edges to create that crushed rock thick edge. You've probably seen us do this with Bondo. The downside of Bondo is you have to mix small batches. It dries really quick. It's hard to work with. That's why our patcher paste is awesome. You have more working time, and it just makes it a lot easier. So what we like to do is just mix up a full batch, get it all on your edges. That way it doesn't set up in the bucket. And then we can go back and fine tune the design, the texture that we want on the edges. So that's the main thing, guys. Once you mix it up, get it out, especially if you're using our accelerator. The baking soda makes it thicker so it doesn't want to sag, so you can really do some really chunky edges. So we're just going to be using a mud pan. We're going to dump this out, and again, we're going to try to get this on the edges as fast as we can, not really worry about what it looks like, and then we'll go back because it's not going to set up on us as fast once it's thinned out on the edges. If we leave it in the bucket, try to scoop out of the bucket, take our time, it's going to wind up heating up, flashing off, and become useless. Right, we got it all over our edges, and again, we just slapped it on there quick. This will give us more working time. So now I'm going to kind of even out the thickness, make sure all my edges are hit, my top corners hit. And then I'm just going to go random pulls, different directions. And it's okay if you see through, because we will be priming this edge, but I don't want to just pull down everywhere to where all the stuff's sagging down, unless that's the look you're going for. A lot of different ways to do this. but we're gonna go for just a random direction. Pull up a little, pull down. As random as we can be. So that's kind of the look we're going for, just real random. And we'll be sanding this also, so again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So you can see this beautiful decorative edge now. What we did is did 80 to 100 grit sanding pads on a palm sander, toned down that texture a little bit, and you can see how cool it looks now. You just want to make sure your top edges where the material is going to flow over doesn't have any raised spots, any lips. We want to make sure that's nice and smooth and rounded, so once we pull our weather stripping, the resin is going to flow over that edge and coat this textured face. Now, the resin will fill in a little bit of that texture, but we still should have some cool texture on this edge and a glass smooth finish on the top. We've already primed the counters. We let that set up for about 45 minutes. It's still tacky, so that's a perfect time to apply your epoxy. So what we're gonna do now is take weather stripping, because we don't wanna tape our edges like we typically would with the masking tape because it's textured. I'm gonna go around and put it right on the edges, maybe overhang it a tad. Next thing, if you have like a roller, you can roll it, or just make sure you press it down really good.
All right, guys, it's mixing time. We got our counter fully prepped. So we're gonna be mixing up a 3-gallon kit, and we're gonna be pigmenting that in equal parts with our milk chocolate, our burnt caramel, and our Camel epoxy pigments. Now, when you're coloring your epoxy, we use 2% pigment to whatever size batch you're mixing up. So in this instance, it's roughly about 2.5 ounces per gallon, because we're mixing up 3 gallons and it's gonna be in equal parts. So first, we'll start getting our part A's dumped out. And while these are draining, I'll go ahead and I'll measure out my pigment. All right, guys, so we got our epoxy pigments pre-measured out, so those are ready to go once we get our epoxy mixed up. Alrighty guys, now that we have the part B added, we really gotta move quick. We don't wanna leave this in a mass in this large bucket for too long, or else it'll flash off, become unusable, and start getting hard before you can get it applied to your countertop. All right, the next step, we're gonna be adding the epoxy pigments to our resin. So when we're mixing up the epoxy with the pigment in it, if you start at your lightest color and go to your darkest, you can always use the same mixing paddle. You just want to make sure that you spin it off in between each color. All right, the next step is we're gonna be making our dirty pour batches. We're just gonna be layering in the epoxy however we see fit. We can make some of them dominantly lighter, some of them dominantly darker, just however you would like to do it. Alrighty guys, now that we have all our batches put together, I just want to reiterate that we don't want to leave these in these buckets too long. So we are against the clock right now, and so we just need to get these over to the countertop, and me and Tyler will get them applied.
So like Kyle said, biggest thing, get this stuff dumped out. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start on the island, pour a little bit out here, I'll jump around, try to get consistent color all throughout the tops. I don't want to pour too much in one area. Again, I'm just kind of watching colors as they come out. And if I get a lot of brown in one spot, I might want to jump around, get some brown or one of the other colors throughout the whole kitchen. And also, if you guys are going for a design, you can draw on the primer a pattern, and then you can just follow that pattern. So it's kind of up to you. We're going to go random here, just start dumping it out. Just a bunch of different random directions, kind of just back and forth. Doesn't really matter. So you'll notice, guys, we got a decent amount here, a decent amount on the back counters. I'm gonna finish this little guy, get some on here, and then what we do next is we go in between, right? We don't wanna just keep pouring on the same spot because we want this to be able to level out and kind of fill. That's the cool part about this system, is we don't have to touch it. There's no artistic touch needed. We're simply dumping out of a bucket, and we get these crazy cool natural effects that you see in real stone. So I'm gonna finish off this last bucket, and then we're gonna start being more precise, filling in these more open spots with our remaining buckets. Okay guys, the next step, we've got all of the epoxy dumped out, and you'll notice some open spots. Don't worry if you guys have those. We're gonna just brush those in with our hand. But again, that comes down to how precise you can pour them. I poured out some really big beads of resin, and it takes that longer to level out. This would probably touch itself within 10-15 minutes, but we're just gonna slick it off by simply just getting resin over the primer, and then it'll let it fill in. Next step, after we've made sure all of our empty spots of epoxy are filled in and leveled out, we're gonna spritz the surface with isopropyl alcohol. So what that's gonna do is create some more cells. We already have natural cells with these pigments, which is really cool. And if you guys don't want more cells, don't use the isopropyl, simply use the denatured alcohol. Let that isopropyl evaporate for about 5 minutes, and then we can mist the surface with denatured alcohol. What the denatured alcohol is for is popping the bubbles. You can see a bunch of micro bubbles in here. We want to pop those, and we don't need a torch to do it. We can simply spray the entire surface with a mist, denatured alcohol, and that eliminates those bubbles. So the next step, guys, we got to pull the weather stripping. Now the perfect time to pull that really depends on the temperature, how long it took you to mix, but the best way to tell and check it, typically when we have our taped edges, we fold it over and look, but we can't do this with the weather stripping, so we can just touch it and see how tacky it is in a corner. You can see how it's really stringy. So this is really a good time to pull, and then obviously we have thick edges too. So if you have thinner edges, you might be able to wait a little longer. The thicker edges you have, you might want to pull it sooner. So once we pull the weather stripping and the resin's flowing down the edge, we're gonna just brush it in so we can slick off all this primer, and that's gonna let the resin flow down evenly and coat this edge. Like I said before, it will fill in some of this texture that we created, but you should still be able to see a decorative edge. So after you guys have your edges brushed in, you can see how it's flowing over now, almost all the way down on spots. And it is filling that texture in a little, but it has a really cool edge to it. It's just a really decorative edge. We have the glass smooth finish on top, and then it has that edge. Very, very cool. So a few pointers that you want to look for are resin flowing over your corners. There's not enough resin, so what I would do if there's not is I'll just get some on the floor, or as I'm scraping the drips off the bottom, I can add it right to that edge and just kind of let it go down, and then that's going to drip down and that edge will be covered. So I like to do all outside corners, even sometimes inside corners, check them. And then once we're satisfied, the last thing you want to do to minimize having to sand your drips is take a putty knife. The resin's starting to thicken up, so you don't want to use a paint stick. Take a putty knife, go around all the bottom and shave off the drips.